This is season 3 of The Sweater with Kathleen Dames. I'm your host, Kathleen Dames, and over the course of our 12-week season, we will knit basic cable together. An awesome worsted weight cabled pullover. Hello, my friends, and welcome to season 3, episode 1 of The Sweater with Kathleen Dames. Yay! I'm so excited to be back. I hope you are excited to be here, and I hope you've already watched episode 0, and so you know a little bit about our sweater basic cable. So Jane isn't dressed right now. Oh, so I'm going to put the sweater on her, and then we'll get started talking about the pattern. All right, Jane, here we go. I've already asked a number of you subscribers if you had any questions, and I got some great ones already. So we'll just dive right into it. I've printed out just page 2 of the pattern, and that's one of the great things about the way I design my patterns. The front page is a cover, it's got all the pretty pictures, it's got a little what we call romance copy, so it gives you the flavor of everything. You don't need to print out unless you want to look at me all the time. But you really don't need to print it out. You can, but it's not necessary to following and using the pattern. So you can save ink and paper if you like. Page 2 always has all the information you're really going to need. It has great notes, it has yarn quantities, the sizes the pattern comes in, just all that sort of basic stuff. Sometimes there's room for the abbreviations. In this instance, the abbreviations are with the pattern on page 3. Kind of depends on how much space we have and how things are flowing along. But for this one, we start off with finished size. Now, sometimes there's some confusion about knitting patterns and how they're written and what size to choose, and some people just go always with third one or the first one if they're a small person, or the biggest one if they're a big person. And that's not necessarily going to get you the sweater that you want. So you want to look at the finished size information. And finished size is the final knitted piece. It's not your size, and sometimes you want it to be the same, but the finished size is the size of the actual garment. So then the next question is about ease. And I've talked about ease before. I'm wearing Solstice Cardi, which was our very first season sweater, and we knit this with negative ease. So we made a finished size smaller than your actual measurements, okay? That's negative ease. When it is smaller, it is closer to 0 on a number line. I have a 3rd grader who's doing number lines than your actual measurements. 0 ease is when it equals your measurements. And then you get something that just skims right over your body. Positive ease is when you want something that's bigger than your actual physical measurements. This has a little bit of positive ease. Is that right? Yes, 2 inches of positive ease. That means that, well, now you all know, I have a 38-inch bust. This is a 40-inch sweater. So that means there's a little room. There's room to layer a shirt underneath. There's just room for more movement and ease, comfort. So that's the basics on your finished measurements and your ease. And the other thing you want to do is to look at your schematic. Hopefully your pattern, whether it's mine or somebody else's, has a schematic. A schematic is just a fancy word for a drawing with measurements on it. And it should give you a lot of information. It's particularly useful if you end up getting a different gauge than the gauge stated in the pattern. So in this case, we're doing 21 stitches and 28 rows equals 4 inches in stockinette stitch. If you were getting something different from that and you really like the fabric you're getting, then you can adapt the pattern. You can, and I can talk more about this as we go along. But what you do is you do the basic math of your, so in stockinette stitch, you'd want to look at another stockinette stitch measurement, like the sleeves on here. And you'd say, okay, well, I'm getting, let's say, 18 stitches over 4 inches. But you're getting 21. And so you do the math and figure out the number of stitches you need to get your size circumference. And this is what I do with every pattern. I calculate based on the stitches and the size I want for all the sizes that I write a pattern for, and I tell you the different numbers to cast on. So, but the nice thing is, if you can, find a number that's close to the number of stitches you're getting for your size, for your gauge. And then you can do the math and decide, maybe you can follow another size of my pattern pretty much straightforwardly and get the size you want in your gauge. Okay, so we've got our schematic. We've talked about the finished size of the piece. Let's talk about measurements. I've already told you my bust measurement. Oh, now you know. We are friends, aren't we? But what you really want to do is take your honest measurements, okay? I know it's no fun, but the great thing, and I've said this before and I will say it again and again, hand knits don't have size tags. Nobody needs to know. Nobody cares. If your sweater fits you, all they're gonna do is see how beautiful you are in your sweater. They're not gonna be like, oh, yeah, you knit the blah blah size. Like, really? And if they do, what do you care? You don't want to be friends with those kind of people. Those kind of people are weird sizeists. We're not sizeists. We're fitists. We want it to fit the way we want it to fit. And to start getting something that fits the way you want it to fit, you need to know your actual measurements. And then you can choose the size, you can make adjustments to my pattern to fit you. You have short arms, then you're gonna wanna do your increases a little closer together so that you reach your upper arm size in the right amount of space. You have longer arms than me? Wow, I have long arms. In that case, you may want to spread out the increases on your sleeves. There are lots of things you can do to change the pattern to make it fit right for you. Okay, so we've done our size. We've talked a little bit about gauge. We've looked at the schematic. So we can talk about the yarn. And I'm going to talk a lot more about the yarn in the next episode, but you can note that in this pattern, I used Malabrigo Rios. So I used 5 skeins, but I like to try, I can't always, but I try to give you approximate yardage because not all skeins are the same. And you may have hand spun that you want to use. Oh my goodness. Oh my, if you use hand spun for one of my sweaters, I am so deeply touched. Hand spinning is amazing. I don't do it because I'm too busy designing more of these, but I think it's spectacular and I love the idea of hand spun sweaters. It's a lot of work and it's a big commitment too. So, but if you are spinning, you're not looking at yarn in quite the same way as somebody buying skeins of yarn off the shelf. So that's why I try to include yardage estimates. It also helps if you're just doing a yarn substitution. Okay, needles. I just want to remind you that everybody's gauge is different. You give 10 knitters the exact same needles and the exact same yarn, and you're gonna get 10 different gauge swatches. It's just a fact of life. It's not bad. You just need to start to figure out what kind of knitter you are. It turns out, am kind of a loose knitter, so if you are a tight knitter, if every stitch is very carefully and snugly made, then you are gonna wanna go up a needle size, even before you start swatching. We are gonna have different gauges. We have different styles. And so if I use kind of a smaller needle because my stitches end up being a little bigger because I'm a loose knitter, you will need a bigger needle to get the same size stitches. So if you know that about yourself, you don't have to start with the needle size that I suggest. Because you are the boss of your knitting, you need to start with the needle size that will most closely approximate the gauge. I don't want you to make a swatch with a smaller needle than you're ever possibly going to get gauge with, and then you have to make another swatch. And that's why, I think that's one of the reasons that we get so frustrated with swatching. We just want to be knitting. We want to be making the thing. At least I do. So, but remember that your swatch is a chance to get to know your needles and your yarn and the pattern. We're doing a fun stitch pattern here, this simple cable twist. Okay, that's my little speech about needles. Are we good? Do you know if you're a loose or tight knitter? If you don't, it's okay, give it a try. But the more you knit, and the better you'll be able to know what kind of knitter you are, and you'll be better able to decide, oh, if it's a worsted weight yarn at a fairly solid stockinette gauge, I probably need to use a US 8. I use a 6. Somebody else, in fact, yes, I used a 6. Somebody else might need to use a 4. There's a lot of room, and like I said, every knitter is different, and that's one of the great things about knitting. Okay, yarn, needles, markers. I like to use both ring markers that go around the needle. I also like coilless stitch markers, and we don't need those for this one in particular because of the way the decreases in the raglan are. Sometimes we mark a stitch and we decrease at that stitch. It's more narrow. In fact, we can see here, this line of the raglan, we decreased like that, and we needed a stitch marker in the stitch. This one, you can just use ring markers. Optional cable needle. I say it's optional because I'm going to teach you how to cable without a cable needle, which is one of my all-time favorite techniques because I find it really speeds up your knitting. There have been only 1 or 2 actual cable stitch patterns I found where I needed a cable needle, and this is not one of them. This is a great, simple, straightforward cable, and I will show you in close-up when we get to it all about how to cable without a cable needle. It's a lot of fun. And then you don't ever have to worry about losing your cable needle, because trust me, it happens. It falls down, your cat takes it, you know, you just can't find it, and then you feel like you're stuck, but you don't have to be. Okay. Stitch holders are waste yarn because, as we have done before, we're going to hold the stitches at the underarm when we get to them, and then at the very end we're going to Kitchener them together. So you want something to keep those stitches safe and open, and I prefer waste yarn because it's flexible. When we get to that point, it's better to have that flexibility in the fabric rather than like those big stitch holders, which are fine, but I just find the waste yarn easier. And then last but not least, we need a tapestry needle, and we'll need it to weave in our ends and Kitchener up our underarms. Okay, and then the rest of page 2 is some notes that I put in to help you while you're knitting the pattern. I suppose technically you don't actually need the notes, but I find them very helpful, and that's it goes along with the podcast. I'm trying to give you some extra bits that I've learned along the way that could help you out. Including, of course, yes, my favorite, 2-tail, long-tail cast on. I taught someone that this past weekend, and it was just like, oh! It's just such a super helpful technique. You'll never run out of yarn on your cast on, and you will not be frustrated. And if you're using hand-dyed yarn, you can start off 2 skeins at once and be ready to go with the alternation. So I think that covers everything in the notes. And so I hope that that is a good explanation to get us started. I hope you are checking out yarns. I'm going to be talking a lot about the different kinds of yarns that you could use for this pattern next week. And then we'll really get into it. And some of the things I want to cover, particularly in episodes 3 and 4. Episode 3, we'll talk about the swatching first sleeve. In episode 4, we're going to talk about different choices you can make to customize this pattern. So some of the things I'm going to address include doing a higher neckline and possibly making it a turtleneck. Doing this as a sweater for a man, because it definitely, this is like a unisex design. It ends up, because we stop a little early, we have a wider neckline, and that's more feminine. So we'd want to close it up a little more probably for a man or a woman. I'm also going to talk about, very briefly, because this to me is a pullover, but I will talk about how you could cardiganize this sweater, and that is make it into a cardigan. There are a few different ways you could do that. Actually, I think just 2. So we'll get to that. And then also my friend Donna wrote in and asked about what to do if you have narrow shoulders. I do not. I have pretty broad shoulders. But if you have narrower shoulders than your bust, things you can do to make this sweater fit you. Because, of course, the yoke portion is dependent on your overall size. The size that you've chosen will determine the number of stitches you have for the yoke. And so we'll want to get into the best way to essentially change from one sweater size, the larger sweater size for your bust perhaps, to a smaller sweater size if you have more delicate shoulders. So those are some of the things we'll get to in the coming episodes. I'm also going to talk about things like adding waist shaping and changing the cable pattern. And let's see, what else is on my list? Doing it with stripes, shaping, altering the cable crossing round, beginning with something like ribbing instead of the garter stitch. Contrasting colors for the collar, cuff, and hems is another nice way, especially if you don't have quite enough yarn. You could also do contrasting sleeves in general. And we'll talk about the possibilities of putting a hood on it or putting a pocket on the front. So those will be coming up in future episodes, when I will also be working on premium cable. So that's what I'm going to be knitting and showing techniques to you as we go along. So don't be surprised if when we do some sort of flat video, you know, when we're looking down at my work, that it is a different color than basic cable. So I think that's it for today. Remember, if you have any questions, the Ravelry forums are a great place. The comments, if you're watching this on YouTube, are another perfect place to ask a question. I check those regularly. And of course, you can always hit reply on a newsletter from me. Comes to me, I can answer your question and we can talk about it more thoroughly. So I hope you are really excited for basic cable. I am, and I will be back next week where we'll be talking all about yarn. And be sure to look for your newsletter from me next week, where I will give you a list and links of favorite yarn possibilities for this sweater. So thanks so much for being here, and happy knitting. Mwah! Bye. This is season 3 of The Sweater with Kathleen Dames. Over the course of our 12-week season, we will knit basic cable together. Many thanks to Jen at Spirit Trail Fiberworks, Corinna at Picnic Knits, Tara Swiger and my fellow Starship Captains, and you for being part of The Sweater with Kathleen Dames. Don't forget to visit KathleenDames.com/thesweater to sign up for the newsletter. Just not a joiner? Purchase your copy of Basic Cable from my Ravelry shop anytime. Be sure to share your progress on social media with the hashtags BasicCable and KDSweater. Questions? Comments? Visit the Kathleen Dames Design Ravelry forum today. Thanks so much for joining me, and happy knitting.